Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest webinar from 43 Alumni for Biden. My name is John Farner. I'm in the organizing committee with the organization. I'm here joined with fellow organizing committee members, Genevieve Hartley and Chris Purcell. We have a really cool and interesting event tonight. We're kind of billing this as discussions with 43 alumni, and we have two alumni from the George W. Bush administration who have been in the news lately, and I'm really looking forward to talking to them and get their thoughts on the current issues at hand, the election, their experience, and so on. But first, I want to introduce Chris Purcell. Chris, you've seen him at some of our other webinars and live events. He's on the organizing committee with me. He also had a recent op-ed that he penned that was published by NBC News. So I've asked Chris to join us to talk a bit about what's going on with 43 alumni for Biden, as well some of the reaction you've gotten from your op-ed. So Chris.
Hey, thanks, John. In terms of the op-ed, I wanted to do two things. I wanted to mention my experience of having been in the White House on 9/11, having been in the Oval Office that night when the president was giving his speech. And I wanted to contrast President Bush's leadership with the failed leadership of Donald Trump, sitting behind the same desk, facing, in some respects, similar life and death decisions. And, what President Bush did was he tried to unite the country together. He made a particular point to go to a mosque in Washington, D.C. and say that, these are our fellow citizens. We're all Americans. We all love this country. We're standing together, and contrast that with Donald Trump, who is continually sowed division on every single issue from racial justice to COVID. And, we have people dying at a rate of 1,000 or more every single day. The current president says almost nothing about those victims. He shows no empathy. He shows no leadership, and that's why the United States continues to be the COVID epicenter. So that was kind of the goal with the op-ed. So it's up on NBCnews.com if you'd like to check it out.
It's also on our website, Chris, 43alumni for JoeBiden.com. So
it is. Thank you. Thank you. The other thing I wanted to mention really quickly is, over the next few weeks, one big focus for us as a group, and we want to have as much engagement with all of you as possible, is on the issue of voter integrity, voter suppression, and what we can do about that. And so one of the big things is going to be for as many of us as possible to sign up to be either a poll worker, for your county, or a poll watcher. We need to have decent people of integrity who can help ensure that people are able to vote safely and securely. And for so many of us who've served in government, I think that is a great way for us to have some involvement, and particularly if you're serving as a poll worker, you're doing so in a nonpartisan way. And so we'll send out more information on how you can do that, how you can, find the information, sign up, that sort of thing. And we'll have some folks come on the webinar over the next few weeks to kind of explain that a little better and explain how we can engage on that. One resource that I would encourage you all to go ahead and look at right now is Greg Jenkins, former head of advance at the White House. He's co-founded a group called Project Yellowstone. So that's projectyellowstone.us, and so you can go on there and get some more information about what they're doing, and we'll ask Greg to come back on and explain it a little better. So I hope you all will get engaged on that and try and help ensure that we have a free and fair election, as we are supposed to be the beacon of freedom and liberty in the world, and not a third world dictatorship. Last thing, just want to note that Liz and I went to college together. So even though I am far more mature, we have known each other for a long time. I am representing with my shirt today. Liz decided to dress up like an adult for some reason. And so with that, let me turn it over to Genevieve, who's worked with Liz and Miles. So, Genevieve.
Hi, thanks guys. So Miles, there you are. All right, Miles has arrived. So I'm sure everyone has seen Miles and Liz. They've been in the news a lot regarding their Homeland Security stint in the Trump administration. So I know Liz because we worked together on the campaign in 2000, starting in 99, but I also slept on her couch for about a month when I moved to DC 2 weeks before 9/11. So she's a dear friend, and I've gotten to know Miles since y'all both have kind of joined this effort to talk about what you saw during the Trump administration. So I worked at Homeland Security as well, and we want to hear what you have to say and what you've been talking about, and kind of talk to others about what we need to listen to and hear and care about when we vote in November.
So thanks for having us on. This is it's really fun to talk to people that really understand how broken things are, because you've been in it when it was working well. In our darkest days, we had leadership, and that doesn't mean that we didn't have lots of debates about what the right policy answers would be. But you didn't have to worry that, occasionally, our esteemed, awesome, loving, boss that we loved would have a garble, but it was not because of his heart or his intent. And I think Miles would probably agree that when we decided to come in 2017, we knew this was not going to be what the Bush administration was like. And for that reason alone, I said no 2 times before I said yes. And the only reason I came in was because somebody finally said, I was living in Dallas at the time with my family. And they were like, it's really, really bad. There are very few people that have expertise, that know how government works. And it's all about the backstabbing and the positioning and everything that you see in the president. It attracts people that are like that. So throughout the government, you have these personalities that are much more into themselves than they are about service in the country, and so it created very, very toxic environments. It was definitely not as I expected. It was not what the 43 experience was about. But I think when we came in, there was hope that hey, he was elected by the people, and we need to give him a chance to try and achieve some of his policy objectives. We're going to try to help him do it the right way. Maybe they can learn. Maybe they can figure out how to work within the government system and achieve your policy objectives legally. For me, it was probably by the summer of 2017 that you realized he's not learning and his people are not learning. This just is who they are. And so it became more about how do you hold things together so we don't end up with disaster. And this has been in the news lately because of Woodward's book, but the August 2017 period where there was a tit for tat, schoolyard bullying back and forth between Kim Jong-un and Trump that led us almost to war just because of his tweets. And that, in real time, Miles will remember this, we worked around the clock one weekend because we thought we might have to mobilize and go to war. And the Department of Homeland Security had not really gone through the exercise of what happens if most of our National Guard is forward deployed in a very serious military engagement, and we have a hurricane season, which it was before the disastrous hurricane season that we had that in 2017, but we're heavily reliant on National Guard to support us during those catastrophic events. So what happens then? What happens if we have a massive outflow of refugees from South Korea. How do we process those people in? So all these concepts that DHS is squarely in a position where they would need to think about those things, but just had never, in our maturation, it's still a young agency, had never gone through the exercise of thinking about how we would contribute if we were in a full-scale war. So you go through experiences like that, and it kind of ingrains in you, we've got to hold this together as long as we can, because this could turn, catastrophic for our country at any moment. And there are any number of examples. Miles has shared many of them publicly. Some of the ones that I think of are more in the classified realm, but he's dangerous because of his incompetence, because of his unwillingness to learn how to do the job. And it became clear that he was just much more interested in the optics. He was much more interested in playing a role of president. And so for all of those reasons, by the time I got to last summer, and my husband's like, hey, didn't you say you're only going to do this for 2 years? And we had any number of job turnovers and secretaries. I think we were on our fourth secretary, and El Paso happened, which was in my area of responsibility when I was at the department, to look at man-made threats. And we had this increasing rise in domestic terrorism. And it created an opportunity to have conversations at the White House and say, hey guys, I know you've been busy with Iran, justifiable, defeating ISIS, that's justifiable, but we have this rising threat. The entirety of the counterterrorism community agrees that we have a problem with white supremacists and anti-government, which, you don't say in the government, you can't call it this, but now that I'm outside of the government, it's right-wing extremist. It's on the fringes of the right that these groups are operating. We have a problem. We need to address it. And they were willing, the senior most people at the White House were willing to help us implement some programs that we had designed. They got us money, but they would not call it domestic terrorism. They refused. They basically said, let's call it preventing violence. And I, being pragmatic, was like, fine, give me the money. I will get the programs done, but I just want you to know I'm going to call it what it is. And they were like, that's fine. And I recognized it for what it was. They were in a position that if they brought up domestic terrorism to this president, he goes off on rants and he can't actually focus on the threat the way it is. So it was shortly after that I made this decision that I can't vote for this man again. And if I can't vote for him, I need to leave. So that's kind of in a nutshell, the journey of the last 3 years. And there's a grieving process of realizing that where our country has come and how much he has damaged the government itself. I mean, the career civil servants, so many have left. There's absolutely a brain drain, and it's going to take years to recover from this presidency.
So Miles, you're up next. And before I ask you a question, Miles, I want to just let everyone know who's watching this, either through Facebook Live or here on the Zoom webinar. If you have any questions, type them into the Q&A session. Facebook, we have people monitoring Facebook right now. Just type a question into the comments area, and that'll be funneled up through us. So want this to be as engaging as possible. But Miles, you've also been on the news a lot lately. And when you came out publicly about your experience with the Trump administration, we'll start there. And I want to look backwards to your experience working for the 43 administration as well. What led you to make that determination? What was either the straw that broke the camel's back, or what made you come out as publicly as you did regarding your experience in working for the Trump administration, and why you decided to support Joe Biden's presidency?
Look, like Elizabeth, I didn't come in as sort of a political hack. We're both policy people. We're both national security people. And so we both came into the Trump administration really eager to help the president develop a cogent national security policy. And, both Elizabeth and I were forged in the aftermath of 9/11 and wanted to come into an administration that was very focused on not just counterterrorism, but emerging threats and where the future of Homeland Security was going. And this is the type of thing that we talked about in the early days, because that was our job, right? Our job was to come in and govern. Our job wasn't to come in politic, which sounds very pedestrian now, because now it feels like everyone that's still in the Trump administration is constantly sucked into the politics of what the president's doing. But look, we came in as national security experts wanting to just protect people. I mean, that's my, motivating influence every single day. And I'm sure it is the same for Elizabeth. Much like her, I came to the realization very quickly that this administration was simply not stable. And I mean that from the most foundational way possible. Like, the day starts, and you compare it to the George W. Bush administration, where the president has W. Bush had a very carefully crafted schedule, and everything flowed from that. And of course, crises would pop up, and that would change everything. And in Washington, it's a truism that when the president's schedule changes, everyone's schedule changes in Washington, because the cabinet secretaries have to move their meetings, and then their deputies and their lieutenants, et cetera. That happens. But the W. Bush administration was very disciplined. What we found out early on in the Trump administration was how incredibly undisciplined the president himself was on a daily basis. And that waterfall effect was so much more severe than any administration we've ever witnessed. Now, to your average American who doesn't work in Washington, they're like, why does that really matter? Come on, the bureaucracy should adjust to the president. Well, it matters, because that bureaucracy is cutting your Social Security checks and protecting you at airports and preventing bad guys from smuggling bombs into the country and stopping cyber threats, all of those things. And if every single day you are distracting that bureaucracy from their core mission by just swaying to and fro, it has real tangible effects on our security. And there's a lot of examples we could give of that. But for me, honestly, the reason that I came out was, and my biggest concern through the whole administration, is that the president was so focused on politics and his own personal political interests that it detracted from these critical Homeland Security issues that we wanted to address. And I call it his wall or nothing approach to governing. Quite truly, 95% of the time he engaged with the Secretary of Homeland Security, he just wanted to talk about the border wall, not just border security as a topic, but the wall itself. Now, look, I'm a national security conservative, and I also believe in border security. I believe in comprehensive immigration reform as well. These are important issues. But the Department of Homeland Security, like I said, is responsible for counterterrorism, cybersecurity, emergency response, some of these nation state threats, like Elizabeth mentioned. We had issues with North Korea and Iran and China, a huge portfolio. It's the third largest department in the federal government, $60 billion a year and 250,000 people. But 95% of the time, the president just wanted to talk about the wall. So what did that mean? That meant that the commander-in-chief was severely uneducated on some of the most crucial threats our country faced during that time period. For example, in the 2018 midterm elections, we were saying internally that we thought the threat from Russia in the midterms was one of the top 3 national security threats to the United States in that year. If you had asked the president, he probably wouldn't have put it in the top 25. We couldn't get him to even talk about it. And here was the Secretary of Homeland Security and her team saying, after looking at the intelligence every morning, this is mission critical. We've got to be laser focused on this, and we've got to get the president focused on it. And he wouldn't. So for me, that was the biggest thing, is we had real threats to American lives, livelihoods, and our way of life. And we couldn't get the nation's chief executive to really care about those issues. He was just so singularly obsessed with one thing when it came to our department. That had very real consequences. And for me, that's ultimately what pushed me out. The actual straw that broke the camel's back for me was towards the end, the president sort of obsessively trying to restart family separation. And then during a period in April of 2019, he wanted to seal the entire US border. Even though we had told him, Mr. President, sealing the US border actually won't keep out illegal immigrants. It will just stop trade and traffic, because the president can close all ports of entry. That's where people drive in and trucks come in, and t-shirts and clothes and food. But when people come up to the border and they say, I'm fleeing violence and persecution, and they claim asylum, under law, you have to let them in. So the president wanted to seal the border, and we said, well, sir, that will just allow you to cut off traffic, but people can still, illegal immigrants can still get in by claiming asylum, so it won't solve the problem. And he literally was not processing that information. I'm pretty sure everyone on this live stream understands what I just said. And what I just said was, the solution that you want is not actually the solution to the problem. But when we said that to the president, it didn't resonate on the 30th time we said it. And to this day, I think he still believes that shutting down the border was going to keep illegal immigrants out. It wasn't actually going to do that. So for me, that's when it was time to go. You could not get through to him. And so we weren't having a positive impact anymore.
Homeland Security has been in the news a lot lately. And when we look at conservative voters or moderate Republican voters and their concern with a Joe Biden presidency, national security is one of those issues that rises to the top. They can't see Joe Biden being tough on immigration and those talking points that the president has used in the past. One of the things that we get as an organizing committee all the time from our supporters, 43 alumni, and even those who supported President Bush, but yet support Joe Biden, is how can I talk to my friends and family and alleviate their concerns? I mean, Miles, you just brought up some good points regarding the president's focus on the wrong part of immigration. He's focused on something that's not going to fix the problem. However, from your experience and what you saw both within the Trump administration and now in advocating for a change in leadership, what do you say to those critics that when they say that Joe Biden's not going to be tough enough, he's not going to, take care of illegal immigration, et cetera? So what is your response to that? And we'll start with Liz first and then go to Miles.
This seems like a great time to clarify that I didn't actually work on immigration issues, and I got to stay in the counterterrorism lane as long as possible. No, in all seriousness, I the first year of service was as Deputy Chief of Staff to Kelly, and then I moved over into our policy office and did counterterrorism and threat prevention. That said,
yeah, I think it's relevant to the issues you worked on. Use immigration
absolutely.
as an example.
I know. I like to throw that out there. I didn't work on immigration.
Yeah, lucky you.
Answer those questions. But in all seriousness, like one of the things that I think was really important that started in the Obama administration, continued in the the Trump administration, and I hope continues in the Biden administration. And I'm talking to people that are writing policy papers for the Biden transition team, is screening and vetting. That is an apolitical, position, right? That we should know who's coming across our borders, and we should effectively use technology in a way that's appropriate, that appropriately protects privacy and civil liberties to the extent that you have that under certain laws. But if you're overseas and you're wanting to come to our country and you are not a U.S. citizen, then your burden of proof that you are who you say you are and that you do not have, you don't pose a threat to our country, that's a pretty high bar. And I think both parties agree to that. Sadly, because of the president's rhetoric and because he initially called it a Muslim ban and extreme vetting, it has become a lightning rod topic. But when you talk to the practitioners in the Democratic Party that would support a Biden administration and no screening and vetting policy, there is no intent to demolish what gains we have made. I mean, these are things that were recommended by the 9/11 Commission that hopefully, and Biden seems to be the cooler head, right? He doesn't seem like a hothead. He's not going to just be like, the heck with it, let's get rid of anything that Trump touched. And talking to subject matter experts that are supporting him, I feel very comfortable. They may make some tweaks on priorities and which population sets we're moving forward with vetting on, but I don't think they're going to dismantle the system that was built up. So from that angle, I feel like if a voter were asking me, but is he just going to let all sorts of dangerous people into the country? The reality is that whether you're a Democrat or a Republican on national security issues, nobody wants another terrorist attack. Nobody wants to be accused of bringing weakness to the system. So they have as much skin in the game to make sure that we are protecting the country and not letting dangerous individuals in. So at least on that angle, I think there's a good argument to be made that is not something to worry about.
And I would add to that, when people say, is Joe Biden going to be tough enough on national security? The response that I would urge people to give friends and colleagues and family members is to talk about the president's record in comparison. And I break it into three buckets: foreign policy, then at the border, and then inside the homeland. And on foreign policy, I would say this. The president has been incredibly weak. He has a soft spot for dictators. And that's not just hyperbole and rhetoric and talking points. I mean, really, we worried on a weekly basis about, was President Trump catering to Vladimir Putin in Russia, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, President Xi in China, writing love letters to the Ayatollah in Iran? These are America's worst enemies. And the president was obsessed with them. He wanted to cut deals with them. He wanted to be friends with them. Sometimes he would accidentally reveal sensitive US intelligence to them, okay? And then on the other side of foreign policy are our friends. And we heard from our friends all the time at me and Elizabeth's level, and they would say to us, what is going on in the United States? What is your president doing? The relationship is fraying. Whether it was, I won't name specific countries because we have to put those people in comments, but our closest allies would say these things to us around the world. So he alienated our best friends who literally have our backs overseas. Literally, these are people who will have their guns trained at bad guys with us in war zones, protecting our troops from being killed, or they will share very sensitive intelligence with us about Americans who could be killed on jetliners or in chemical weapons attacks or other things. We depend on our friends overseas to fight forward to protect us. Alienates them, falls in love with the dictators who are trying to kill Americans. So total failure when it comes to foreign policy. Donald Trump has been, in aggregate, a total failure. There have been some successes. We deserve to call out those successes. The peace agreements in the Middle East this week, those are good. But on balance, he's really shifted things towards the bad guys and away from the good guys. So then at the border, I would say this. Donald Trump, and look, we both served at the Department of Homeland Security, Elizabeth and I actually think Donald Trump has been a very weak border security president. Why do I say that? I say that because we told him time and time again, if your whole focus is on building the wall, you will fail. Because under US law, you can build the wall across the entire border, but the law allows someone to still walk up and touch that wall and say, I'm here to claim asylum because I'm fleeing violence and persecution. And we're required under law to let them in the gate, process their application. And because the system is so broken, it takes 8 to 10 years to give them a yes or no answer. At that point, they've disappeared in the United States. But when we told them, you have to focus on Congress and legislation to fix that fundamental problem, the president was like, I'm not interested. I want the wall. I told people I was going to give them the wall. And we said, well, if that's how you spend your political capital, you won't solve the problem. And that's how he spent his political capital. If he had started earlier and done immigration reform, we would have better border security. Category number 3, domestic security and homeland security in general. Because the president was so focused on this middle ground here and the wall, he didn't pay attention to things like emerging threats from drones and chemical weapons and cybersecurity threats. We did good things in those places, but that was despite the president and not because of him. So Elizabeth's office did extraordinary things on some of those issues, but they didn't really have the air cover of the president of the United States. They just had to kind of go it alone. And there were specific instances where we basically begged him for attention on those issues. I remember on drones, for instance, we became really worried about drone attacks against Americans. We still are. It's a big concern. A lot of people can buy drones. You can attach them explosives. Bad things could happen. We went to the president, Secretary Nielsen and I called him and said, we need your help passing legislation to protect Americans against drone threats. And his response was, don't worry about Congress, just shoot them down anyway. And the secretary said, well, sir, it's actually against the law. We need the authorities to intercept these drones. He said, I don't care about the law, just shoot them down. And the secretary's like, I'm not gonna break the law to do this. I need your help. He couldn't be bothered. Now, we ultimately got it done anyway, probably months longer than it would have taken. But that's one example about how the president of the United States, not actually being invested in that part of his job, had real consequences. God forbid there was a terrorist attack using drones in that period. There wasn't, but Donald Trump would have been culpable if there had been. So across those categories, foreign policy, then right at the border and domestic security, he's been a very weak president.
I want to go back to Liz real quick, and then, so we're going to just go back and forth, and Chris and Genevieve, jump in here when you can. But like I started the last question by saying that Homeland Security has been in the news a lot lately. And whether you go back a few months, even a few years, to family separation, or the news about hysterectomies occurring under ICE watch, this should resonate to the pro-life community in in our opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And Elizabeth, I know that you've been on record here and there with talking about your personal journey and your personal beliefs regarding, being pro-life and what that means when you look at policies such as family separation and even reports of these types of actions occurring under federal custody. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? It's not necessarily specific to Homeland Security, but there is a connection there when it comes to being pro-life, and it's even within the COVID response too, with devaluing human life above wearing a mask in some cases. So I just want to see your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I really wrestled with this, right? Like I came to the decision I wasn't voting for Trump last fall, but didn't come to the decision that I was voting for Biden until this past summer, just about 2 months ago. And in large part because I came from a community and an upbringing that said that, the values that Republicans espouse are more aligned with a biblical worldview than the values Democrats espouse. And take away Trumpism, that's somewhat still true, although as I've had to educate myself over the last few months, I've come to have a broader perspective on that some of the things that Democrats emphasize, in fact, might have more alignment with Scripture than I gave them credit for. But I had to really wrestle, and I had to study, and I had to. Our church happened to be doing a read the Bible through over the course of a year, and so I just happened to be in the prophets this summer when you're starting to see over and over and over again that God called Israel to account, not just for their false worship of running after other gods, but for their for not taking care of the least of these, of the widow, the orphan, the refugee. And particularly in the book of Jeremiah, like he really calls this out. And it's funny because it's not that I haven't read it before, but it just was jumping off the page in this season as I've been reading through Scripture. The disconnect between what you saw many in the party, many that call themselves Christians, and I'm not passing judgment one way or the other, but as those of you that are believers know, a lot of people identify with that label and maybe aren't necessarily in a personal relationship with Jesus. So there's, I can appreciate that people that means different things to different people. But people that are dear to me were espousing these things, and you would ask them, but what about the fact that we have turned our back on refugees in the last few years? Are you okay with that? And I was in the middle of that process where we were trying to enhance vetting. And for the first 2 years, I thought that was the right answer to reduce our ceiling because the security mechanisms were not in place. The Obama administration had so increased the ceiling, so you had a flood of refugees that had not been appropriately vetted, and we had a number of cases opened by the FBI after they're here. And if you're not familiar with this section of law, once somebody is here legally as has a green card, it is really hard for the government to remove them, even if we have evidence that they're a terrorist. So that screening part is really important. We got to make sure that we vet who is coming in and that they aren't, in fact, having nefarious intent while they're here. But we spent like a year or two, and we did that. I went to Egypt. I looked at the systems that our USCIS was doing overseas and how they vet and process. And I came away with the realization that of all of the populations that gain entry into the United States, refugees are vetted more extensively than any other population. And to add to that, we made a number of changes that are good changes so that we could process better, screen better, and bring more people in. And ironically, the year that you could say that DHS could operationally say that we can vet this number, this higher number, was the year that the ceiling dropped even further. And so then you started to realize this has nothing to do with security. This has everything to do with a xenophobic, racist viewpoint that certain people in the administration hold, that they don't want people of a different skin color or a different ethnicity coming into our country. And that it's turned my stomach. I've worked with many of the people that have a passion and a heart for refugees and asylees, and it has been very difficult for them to watch the U.S. government that used to be a beacon of light for the world basically say that, you know, we're closed, and reject being able to help those in the most desperate of circumstances. Now, look, I'm not the let's open the door and invite everybody in. We don't have the resources or the security mechanisms to do all of that, but there is a balanced and nuanced approach. So the reason I bring this up is that, as you said, John, it is tied together. The way that we treat all human life, offering all people dignity, because from a biblical worldview, you're created in the image of God. The Imago Dei is the phrase. And that means that everybody, regardless of skin color or where they were born, deserves to be treated with dignity, and because they're image bearers of God. And I have not seen that in the Republican Party in the last 4 years. I've certainly not seen that in the president or in any of the policies that he's carried out. So when you start talking about pro-life, absolutely, for me, being pro-life and finding opportunities for people to have other choices besides abortion and trying to reduce the number of abortions in this country, that is super important. But so is also recognizing that Black Americans have been dealing with significant racial injustice through a variety of systems, including law enforcement, and for the president to not acknowledge that and recognize it and say, let's figure out how to deal with it. We can debate about the policy, right? We can debate about how you address the concern. You can debate about how you help the refugee or how you help the asylee. All of that's a legitimate thing to debate. But in this particular president, it's not about the how. That's not where our policy differences are. It's that he fundamentally doesn't care about anybody else. And he has allowed himself to be surrounded by people that, in my view, and Miles, I'll see if you'll back me up here, that there are people in this administration that are in fact racist. And there's no place in public service. There is no place in public service for that kind of ideology and hatred. So for all of those reasons, it became, the more I studied it, the more I became comfortable with the fact that pro-life is way more than just abortion, and that this evil has infected the Republican Party, and it needs to be rejected so that we have some semblance of hope of reconstituting conservatism in the country.
Yeah, I memean, being pro-life shouldn't just stop at birth, right?
That's right.
Should carry through to end of life also.
I want to back Elizabeth up on something that she said there. I used to recoil in the first year of this administration at the suggestion that Donald Trump himself was racist. I was like, look, he may say really off-color things, but in his heart of hearts, this guy is not a bigot. And I thought that was kind of a mainstream media overreaction, and people who, had Trump derangement syndrome so bad. I actually think I was wrong. I'm now willing to say I do think the president has some ingrained racial animus. And I saw that really specifically on the topic of immigration and, as Elizabeth notes, refugees, because when the president would talk about people he wanted to keep out, and I mean this very, very literally, he would raise countries like Somalia and Rwanda and Zimbabwe and Haiti. He would invoke those countries all the time. He would say, why do we need one more person from Somalia? But when he would talk about places where he wanted to increase immigration, he would talk about Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden. Those are 5 countries I've heard the president talk about. Those are 5 of the most homogenous countries on the planet. Those are the Nordic countries.
Socialist countries also.
Yeah, that's right. He wanted white Westerners to come to the United States. And he wanted people that didn't look like us to not come into the United States. I don't know how that's not racial animus. I mean, even to the point where he would say to the Secretary of Homeland Security, who, Kirstjen Nielsen, who you all have seen, she has Nordic heritage. She's a blonde white woman. He would say things like, people that look like you, where are you from? I mean, that we're not joking here. And this is the president of the United States. So yeah, I came away thinking there was some racial animus in how he addressed issues. And now it's very obvious why he hasn't tackled those issues with alacrity and instead has done so very reluctantly. And that's because of his own personal biases.
I was going to ask y'all, just because, we're closing in, do y'all still consider yourself Republicans? And there are probably Republicans on the call who worked for Bush 43. What do you want to see the Republican Party going forward? Like, what do you hope coming after November 3rd, hopefully? But just like, what do you envision? What's your hope, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, Elizabeth, unless you want to go first.
Go for it.
Look, yes, I consider myself a Republican, but I consider myself a Republican from years past. And I think the way the party is now, I mean, I genuinely believe the party's become a cult of personality around Donald Trump. It's very unfortunate because Donald Trump, I don't believe, is a conservative. I really just don't think he is. When we talk about people who've really influenced the Republican Party and conservatism, Donald Trump's never heard of a Friedrich Hayek or a Milton Friedman or, any of these things.
Right.
He's never heard of them. He doesn't know. So, but I still consider myself to be of that ilk. But I believe that instead of fully abandoning the party, we've got to rebuild it. And so Elizabeth and I have been working together on something that's actually going to officially launch tomorrow. It's called the Republican Political Alliance for Integrity and Reform. It's a mouthful. So fortunately, the acronym is REPAIR. And our focus is restoring leadership in Washington, D.C., refocusing the priorities of the Republican Party, and repairing the country. Ultimately, we really want to try to restore the GOP from the inside. We're going to bring together a lot of the groups that are working on those issues. So tomorrow you'll see an announcement from us, and I can also tease today, for those of you that are interested, we're going to announce tomorrow 2 people who are ex-Trump senior officials who are joining our team. This is going to make a big splash. So if you're not watching the news tomorrow at 4 p.m., you're going to be missing out. We're going to be adding more people to the team. And we're also, again, we're focused beyond just November 3rd. We're not just trying to make sure Donald Trump doesn't get reelected because he's a danger. We really think we need to start doing that very difficult, hard spade work of repairing the party in the country and talking about the ideas that matter again and going back to being the party of ideas. I actually think the Republican Party, for a reason, has been dominant in American politics because for the longest time, we stood for what was right. We stood for human freedom and human dignity and economic growth and prosperity. We were better at fighting poverty than the left was. We were better at economic growth than the left was. We were better on social issues than the left was. We're the party of Lincoln. We're the party that ended slavery. We were better at those things. But Donald Trump has taken us so far the other direction that we're not better at those things anymore. So we're going to try to do some of that hard work. And hopefully some of you will join us. So I'll make this shameless plug. You can find us on Twitter at Repair Republic and at repair45.org. So stay tuned tomorrow. We'll have more, but maybe over to Elizabeth.
No, Miles, I think you covered it. Like I've always been an optimist, and I was heavily influenced by all of our former boss. And compassionate conservatism is kind of when people ask me to describe my philosophy, political philosophy, I find myself using those terms that were written. And some of the, I don't know if anybody remembers, Marvin Olasky advised Bush when he was governor in Texas on some of those themes, and he went to my church and was a professor at UT. And anyway, I'm still, it's funny 20 years later, and you go back to kind of the things that you grew up with, and that's what I would love to see us return to, that we could find kindness again and listen to somebody that has a different perspective and argue based on the merits, but not in a personal way, which is probably Pollyanna-ish, I realize, but that's still what I'm hopeful for and what we'll work towards.
Well, we're about 47 minutes into the webinar, and I know that we try to keep these around between a half hour and 40 minutes, but we've gotten a ton of questions we have not gotten to so far. Like I said, Homeland Security is in the news, and even if it's using U.S. forces within our own states for political gain. We've got a lot of questions on that. I'm sure both of you have a lot of opinions on that as well. You know, we can't get to all of them right now. I will say, is there any kind of, I'm glad you got to the Tuesday announcement, Miles. I was going to ask you about your future plans and what comes next. So I'm glad you brought that up. But really quick, in 30 seconds or less, is there anything else you want to bring up? I know I brought up the use of force in the United States. The attack on Lafayette Park was one of the catalysts that formed 43 for Biden efforts. We saw what went on in Oregon, and now new news keeps coming out on the type of force that was used in even situations like Lafayette Park. But I'll kind of throw that out there as a question, but any final thoughts you guys want to bring up are more than welcome. So Miles, we'll start with you first.
Yeah, look, I would say this. I'm worried about the gross misuse and underuse of the Department of Homeland Security under this president. He has heavily politicized DHS when it's a nonpartisan law enforcement agency. So when we talk about intervention in cities around the country, the president wants to use DHS as his own sort of domestic army. That's very scary, and we should be concerned about that. And then I say underuse, because when it comes to things like the coronavirus pandemic, DHS was built to address exactly these types of disasters, and Elizabeth can certainly speak to that. And the president, in failing to activate the department that was created for this type of crisis, has been complicit in the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans. And that's not, again, not another talking point. Actually, if the president had done what Elizabeth and her team had said he should do earlier, people would be alive today, but he failed to use that department the way that it should be. And the last thing I would say on that is this. I mean, again, I go back to DHS was built out of the rubble of 9/11. I've said this before. It was built so that we wouldn't have another day where we had to hear all of these stories in the news of people making final phone calls to loved ones, you know, from burning buildings. Here we are, almost 20 years later, and we're dealing with another national crisis where people are making final phone calls to loved ones as they're dying from that crisis. But this time, they're alone in hospital rooms, unable to connect to their families, and dying by themselves. And that's happening because of the president of the United States. That's happening because of a failure to govern the way that he should have. So look, I think that regardless of whether you're a Democrat or Republican, that's pretty disqualifying to the presidency in my eyes. But over to Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'm going to use my brief time to answer some of these great questions. Kim Fuller asked about, does the president have a grip on the nature of the threats that we had prior to COVID? The answer is no. This is a quick round. I'm not going to go into detail, but Miles and I have both spoken out about why this is a problem. Ed Cash asked, hi Ed, good to see you. If DHS CISA's ability to secure the upcoming election is there, and concerns about the president tinkering with DHS communications. So I have tried, Miles and I have tried to be really, really clear when we're talking publicly. There is really, really great work happening at CISA. There's really great work happening in parts of DOD that do offensive cyber. There was a David Ignatius article today that kind of describes some of that. And the good news is that the government, the patriots that work in the government, the civil servants, and then the small group of politicals that came in with the view that they're there to do the right thing, they are succeeding. And I feel very, very good that we are stronger in our election security, especially at the local level with our state and local partners, than certainly we were 4 years ago, and compared to even 2018, we've made improvements. That said, one of the best ways to secure our elections is to clearly communicate what's going on, right? So if you're dealing with disinformation, you inoculate the public by telling them that disinformation is happening. Or if you are concerned that one of the misinformation activities might be telling, a foreign actor may call and say, go to this location as your polling station instead of this location. We'll tell them that they have that capability, so that they know if they get this random call that they need to call somebody that they trust and know in their local community, say, is this real? And we've lost that ability because of all of the noise, because there are accusations that one party or the other party is going to steal the election. The trust in government is further eroding. And of course, the president's rhetoric is extremely divisive. So there's a part of election security that is completely within our control, and we're absolutely failing. The part that's more of the technical and behind closed doors and classified, those guys are rocking it, and I feel very, very confident that they're doing a good job.
Caught me off guard. I was on mute. Elizabeth and Miles, thanks so much. I guess I can speak on behalf of Chris, Genevieve, and the rest of the organizing committee. It's an honor to call you 43 alumni along with us, and we can't thank you enough for the work you've done over the past few weeks and months regarding this election, and sharing your personal stories of your experience working for the Trump administration, and really what the future holds and what comes next, and where we can go for the future. So we really appreciate it. Chris, Genevieve, any final thoughts at all?
No, thank you so much.
Awesome.
Love you, Liz.
Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate it. Stay tuned for our next dialogue. And Elizabeth and Miles, like I said, we had a lot of questions come in, not only in the Q&A section. So if you don't mind, we're going to invite you back in a couple of weeks. Miles, go into more detail about the repair effort, and maybe we can get some more folks in your group talking to us. So we really appreciate it.
We're in. Just tune in tomorrow afternoon to the news. Just get on Twitter around 4 p.m. and you'll be satisfied.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks a lot, everybody. Really appreciate it. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.